Episode 5, it's time to jive in Izzy's world. What's going on? Go listen to my debut album, GLUM. It's out now on all streaming platforms. The reviews have been glowingly positive. It's been so cool to see how much you guys are enjoying my music, because that is my passion. So thank you. Go listen to it. Go check it out. That's all I'm going to say about it. The other thing, if you would like, episode 5.5, the Patreon exclusive. It's coming out right after this on my Patreon. Go listen, go check it out. I think I'm going to have to expand Izzy's World because you guys are liking it so much, and I'm loving the format. I'm loving the fact that I can actually explain my points of view. That being said, here we go. This is episode 5, and I want to just come straight out of the gate. Gang busting, baby. I'm gang busting. And someone asked a really good question, and they were asking about the intentionality behind symbols and what that means. And they were asking it with regards to the peace symbol discussion we've been talking about for several weeks. So we've gone over the transformation of the Nordic Elder Fruthar rune Algiz, and how that changes when you invert it and turn it upside down, and how that became the peace symbol and was the nuclear disarmament, blah, 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 blah. So the question is the intention behind the symbol, if it changes, right? Does that matter? And the best questions are always questions that don't really have a clear-cut answer, because it means you're actually asking something that is worth asking. Okay, there are dumb questions. I'm sorry, okay? But that's a great question. And I don't really have an answer for you, but I have something for you to chew on and something for you to think about. And it's somebody that's extremely controversial. So I'm not going to get into the political aspects of this person, but this person is Karl Marx, the inventor of communism. And what I'm going to be discussing with it is, there's this video I watched about him that blew my mind. I went to the University of Oregon and I was a philosophy major. Now, the University of Oregon has a really good philosophy department, and most of the focus in that department is Marxist literature. There's a bunch of just Marxist people. They love that shit. They love to pretend like they're gonna destroy the fucking elites. It's just the funniest thing in the world. My point with this is, it's very interesting when you actually start to learn what was behind the man of Marx, the person he projected himself to be. The first things I want to point out: Marx was such a dark and ominous person. And I want to make this abundantly clear. I'm not even disparaging him. I'm not disparaging anything. I'm not disparaging communism. I'm simply going to talk about people who know him very well. So the sourcing on this is Marx academics and people who have written autobiographies on Marx, have studied him, and this is just food for thought, okay? So, first of all, Marx's son Edgar used to write his father, and he used to write these letters, and he would call him "my dear devil." A woman he loved called him her dear demon. Another woman called him her wicked knave, and others would refer to him as a goblin sorcerer. Now, remember, this is in the 1800s. These words were a bit heavier then, right? He also wrote a play, and this play is titled Ulanem. Now, Ulanem, the word, is an anagram. It is the word Emmanuelo, transmutated and turned around. Now, if you know what Emmanuel is, Emmanuel is the name of the Christ. It is what they called Jesus. They called him Emmanuel, come Emmanuel. Another word for this is Manuelo. So it's Manuelo backwards. Okay. Now, this play is insanely dark. The main character's name is Luciendo, which is obviously a play on Lucy, which is, similar to Lucifer, right? Now, this was during the 1840s, which people who study Marx refer to as his dark decade, okay? And his favorite quote was a Mephistopheles quote, which is, "Everything alive deserves to perish." Okay? Now, this book right here is the Marx Engels Reader, and this is a book that is supposed to help you interpret Marx and his manifesto and all of his works that he wrote, right? The Communist Manifesto, etc. Engels is someone he worked with, that he came up with a lot of these ideas for him. Now, Engels literally quote and called him a dark man who hops, leaps, and springs on his heels. He is the monster of 10,000 devils. In 1837, a letter was written by his father. This was right before his father passed away. And he said that Marx's heart was animated by demons, and that he didn't know if his son would ever truly be able to be happy. And he questioned whether the demons that ran the machinations that was Marx's heart, whether they were good or they were Faustian. Okay, now Marx was obsessed with Mephistopheles. Now, if you don't know what Mephistopheles is or was, Mephistopheles ethos is these like German folklorish things, and they're sort of these legends, and he is a demon, okay? And I'm going to kind of read some stuff off of the Wikipedia. Mephistopheles, also known as Mephistopheles or Mephisto, is a demon featured in German folklore, and as the chief devil in Faustian legend. He originally appeared in literature as the demon in the Faust legend and has since become a stock character appearing in other works of arts of pop culture. He's known for being invented in the historical story of Johann Georg Faust. He never became an integral part of the traditional magic, but he was also referred as the shadow of Lucifer and the prince of trickery. During the medieval and Renaissance times, Mephistopheles is equated with the devil due to his high position in the hellish hierarchy. He is one of the 7 great princes of hell, along with being one of the first 4 angels who rebelled against God and fell. Though due to the different roles of Mephistopheles, there is not a set appearance of what he looks like. He appears very ambiguous. Mephistopheles' name was possibly taken from Hebrew words where Mephiz is deemed as a destroyer and a tofel. Not sure what tofel means. And it is seen as a slander. Mephistopheles has a different perspective depending on the writer. Overall, he was seen as a cruel demon who was mischievous and cunning. He primarily fed on the sufferings of people and loved to spread lies. Now, why am I talking about this? What is the point of this? Okay, what is the point of this? My point with this is there's a quote, and it is, "You will know them by the fruit that they bear." What did communism what did Marx's doctrine, what did the Communist Manifesto lead to? Okay, what was it aimed to be, right? Does it matter what the intent was? Does it matter what the intent should have been? Do these things matter? Does your knowledge now, knowing Marx's psychology and what people said about him, to the point to where somebody who wrote an autobiography on Marx in 1968 said there were times Marx seemed possessed by a demon who he knew was creating works of evil. He had a devil's view of the world. Now, this is by Robert Paine, okay, who is a Marxist academic. Now, this is my point with this is like I'm saying, the intent. We now know a side of Marx. I never knew any of this. They never taught me any of this in my philosophy undergrad, where I'm supposed to be learning about the heroic communist that Marx was and how brilliant he was, et cetera, right? You don't see this intent behind it. You don't know this. You don't understand this. This is not like common knowledge. People who are communists or people who are Marxists probably ignore this. Now, does it mean something? Probably. It probably does, right? I mean, if we look at communism objectively, we can say that it has never really worked and it's led to a lot of problems in the world. Now, knowing the root of it, in my opinion, changes. It changes what it is. Especially when we see and we know what his inspiration was, right? We see his obsession with the Mephistopheles, right? And we see his favorite quote that is from a Mephistopheles text, that is, all that is alive deserves to perish, which literally shows that he is of this idea that he wants to dismantle creation in and of itself. He wants to see things perish. He wants to see things die. This is beyond political rebellion. This is beyond the class warfare. This is a need to destroy, especially when we know Marx's family was from a particularly impoverished area. They particularly were not wealthy, but Marx he was so brilliant and he was so intelligent. He would fancy the minds of all of the aristocrats, and they would bring him in, and he would partake in these parties and all of this sort of like debauchery, right? Does this change the intent of what Marx was trying to do? Does it change anything? What does this mean, right? To me, I get a much better view of who Marx was. I've never ever seen anyone jokingly ever call someone a demon or a devil, especially not like a child to their father. That's fucking bizarre in my opinion. Especially, it's not like it's like one kid. It's like the wicked knave and all of these things, right? So the intent behind symbolism absolutely carries weight. And my answer to that is I really don't know. I really don't have a hard answer to that. But I think that the original intent will always be there, and it will always taint the current perception of things, because once you know, there is no unknowing. That is why knowledge can often be compared to like Pandora's box. Once you open the box, you can't unknow something. I think that this is how we actually get to answers we can be comfortable with until we have information that comes along and changes our minds yet again, right? I think that this is much better than another kind of person I've been coming across lately, and it's something that I'm finding like increasingly problematic, and this is realizing the hubris of some Protestants. And I'm not even trying to make this a Catholic Protestant thing, but I find it so bizarre that so many people think that they are so well versed in scripture that they can completely derive their own interpretations that completely contradict like the theological works of sort of what I would call the high church, or what is called the high church, right? Like, for example, the Orthodox Church or the Catholic Church, right? What they have done is they have a liturgy, right? So they have, obviously, their idea is that the church has the correct interpretations of scripture, and that's what they obviously teach. You know, I had one person in particular tell me that we were in the little season of Satan within the book of Revelation, right? Which we very may well be. I don't know. I don't think we are. In fact, I was supposed to do a podcast with someone who's very prominent in the conspiracy world, and they wanted to talk about that, and I ended up not doing the podcast because I don't think we are, and I don't want to be responsible for spreading that idea because I don't think that we are, and I think that that is not good. So anyways, but I asked this person, like, how did you get to that conclusion? Because there's a lot of biblical scholars that I really like that actually have like proven how we're not in the little season. And they were like, well, by my own interpretation, which is insanely egoic, and it's a lot of hubris. I think that is very dangerous. And it's interesting because that is exactly what Catholics said would happen, the Catholic Church said would happen within the Sola Scriptura Protestant Reformation, is that eventually everybody would have their own denomination because we would be just continuously splitting hairs. And that's exactly what happened. That's exactly what's happening. There's over 40,000 denominations within the United States alone. And it's just, I get it. Everybody wants to party, but sometimes, the party's too big. You got to go home, right? Some of us got to go home. Okay. I think if we are having opinions that are contradicting the people who put the Bible together, literally, the church existed before the Bible. This is one thing that's very interesting, and I don't want the people. The King James version is corrupted. I'm not talking about that. The people that ran the church, the original apostles, the people who have true apostolic succession, the church existed before they put the Bible together. The Bible was then culminated. That's how the books were even invented, actually, was putting together the Bible. But the thing is like, the church has existed for a very long time. They actually have a process of elimination that I have with like occultic knowledge, or with how I even came back to Christ, right? Which is like, I was a Gnostic at one point, and then I was a literal Luciferian. I was this, I was a that, and I just kept learning, and I kept shedding off like a snake, shedding its skin continuously, eternally, until I finally came to Christ, right? But that should be, life should be an evolution. Learning and knowledge should be an evolution. My explaining of Marx just now hopefully gave you some new ideas, and hopefully gave you something to imparted some sort of wisdom onto you, to where you learn something that helps you grow. You need to be a constant evolving, right? A constant evolution. You are eternally becoming the butterfly over and over and over again, 1,000,000 times, right? That is the quest for knowledge. That is the true quest for Sophia. Right? That's what a philosopher is. A philosopher is one who seeks wisdom, right? And it's ever changing, it's ever evolving. Okay? That's what it should be. It's not just, well, per my own idea. Like, I have an idea and I proved my own. I think the moon is made of cheese and I proved it. That's great. But, there are people who contradict those ideas, who have been around. This isn't like a mainstream media versus alternative media discussion. This is thousands of years of theology. St. Thomas Aquinas, some of the greatest philosophical minds of our time, people who literally lived through Jesus' day, literally wrote the Bible, who are connected directly through apostolic succession to the church. And you think your idea, reading the Bible in your Minecraft jammies, in your creeper hoodie, is going to supersede the works of people like Thomas Aquinas? Okay. I don't know. Maybe it is, dude. Maybe it is. And I'm not trying to be a dick. I think we need to really be asking ourselves questions, and especially when when someone says something to someone like me who is always on the quest for more knowledge, I'm obsessed with learning. I'm obsessed with the quest for knowledge. I love it. I literally love it. I'm literally Solomon in his cave, not even in his cave, in his temple. I'm Elijah in the cave, but I'm Solomon in the temple, pondering the thoughts of the universe, literally with my magic singlet, catching demons into my ring and then pounding it into the sand because I want more. That's what I do, right? And if I shoot you a thumbs up over something you said, that means I don't think I can get through to you. I have to move on. You know, that's a bad thing because I love the back and forth. I try to answer every comment on these. I try to answer everything. I really do. I try to answer DMs now. I'm trying to be the DM guy. It's hard. It's really hard. Don't get hit on by any girls. I don't. Probably because every time I do the show, I have to chug a Red Bull. And then I'm swollen and bloated. I went for a 3-mile run today. Just burped into the microphone. Went for a 3-mile run today with my dog. Exhausted my dog. We're on the freaking cruise for truth. We're on a truth cruise. Okay? I don't have time for baddies in the DMs. They don't even hit me anyways. Okay? Anyways. So that's my Protestant rant. But I still love you guys. But, you know, Pastor Dave is not smarter than Sam Shimon, who is a literal human encyclopedia of the Bible. Okay? That being said, we need to move on to, since we're talking about Catholics anyways right now, the Pope. Pope Francis has died. Now, we need to talk about the truth about him dying. I will say this, and I will say this with hopes that we can keep this in the family. That means keep it in the YouTube, okay, bros? There's 2,000 of you now. Don't freaking breach my trust. My mother works for the Catholic Church, okay? My family is very, very Catholic. Now, me might be going ortho soon. If we don't get Cardinal Robert Serra in there, who's trying to end some of this bullshit, dude, I might be jumping ship. Okay, let's just say that right there. We had Pope Francis, who was literally throwing parties in the Vatican, worshiping, what was his name? Papama. There's a South American god named Papama or something similar to that. He literally had South American people in St. Peter's Basilica literally doing pagan rituals to Papama, so that is a thing. Okay, was not a fan of Pope Francis. Pope Francis was also responsible for certain dioceses within the Catholic Church hiding assets, hiding millions and millions of dollars. Bunch of stuff going on with that, and I'm not going to really discuss that. Let me just explain the way the Pope is elected. Okay, the Pope dies. There's a 9-day grieving period. After the 9-day grieving period, there's like a 20-day, I believe it's 20, might be 15. There's like a 20-day voting process where the popes that are under the age of 80 get to vote who the new pope is going to be. Okay? If there's not 2/3 majority to the vote, okay, they continue to do it. And eventually it gets down to 1 or 2 candidates. Well, it has to get down to 2, and then you vote. Okay? What they do from there is there's a chimney. And black smoke arises out of the chimney if they have not selected a new pope. White smoke arises once they have elected a new pope. Well, this time in 1958, what happened? For the first time ever, white smoke came out, and then black smoke came out afterwards, meaning there was a struggle for power within the Vatican. Okay, the CIA has since came out and has said that they were directly involved, stating the reason being they did not want anyone to further tensions with Soviet Union. Okay, so basically they wanted someone who was going to condemn what was going on in the Soviet Union. Pope John the 23rd was then elected. Now, if you don't know, when you become pope, you change your name. Okay, you get a pope name. You change your name. Pope John the 23rd notoriously selected the same name of another pope who was known as an anti-pope. this is crazy. He's the only pope to ever select the same exact name as another pope who was a known anti-pope who was installed by whoever fucking guy that was a bad guy. Okay, now that's the extent of my history on that whole thing. Okay, but that's what happened, right? And in my opinion, I believe that the papacy has probably been infiltrated by those kinds of individuals for a very long time. This is in part of the reason I am considering converting over to the Orthodoxy, because I do see issues with this. And then 1958 is also when Vatican II was installed. Vatican II is when they stopped doing the Latin masses and a bunch of other stuff that I find problematic. We've had tons of changes within the church, even in my life, right, my short life, and there's just a bunch of wild stuff with it. But here's the interesting thing, is the day before, on Easter, I mentioned my mother working for the Catholic Church. My mom had received word, because this is how the Catholic Church works, by the way. If you work for the Catholic Church, they take direct orders from the Vatican. The Vatican send words down. So it goes from the Vatican, and then it goes into the diocese. The dioceses are like individual. Think of it as like a school. It's within a school district, right? The diocese is the school district. And then obviously it goes all the way up to the Vatican, right? So they had received word that the Pope was unable to speak, and that they were doing some sort of AI language model to like help him talk and all this fucking crazy stuff. And then, he ends up dying the day after Easter. But here's the thing that's interesting. I talked about this in a reel. The day after Easter is a very important day, at least this year, because this year, March 21st, 2025, is exactly 1 month after the March 21st, 2025 Yuga shift that is talked about by Vedic astrologer Ian Ferguson. Ian Ferguson states this is the day that we transition from Molochian consciousness over into Luciferian consciousness. I'm not going to talk about that a ton here. There's tons of videos of me talking about this over on my Patreon. Ian Ferguson creates a trinary, which is like a binary but with 3, framework of looking at reality. You have Molochian consciousness, Luciferian consciousness, and Most High consciousness. You can basically break down every person into one of these 3 categories. Ian Ferguson's idea on the Catholic Church is that the Catholic Church has been hijacked by a Molochian consciousness. This is not entirely what I believe, but this is something that I think is extremely interesting, that he states that we are going to be moving into a Luciferian consciousness, and then he states the Vatican and the Catholic Church has become Molochian, and then the head of the church dies exactly one month after. April 21st is also the 111th day of the year, of the calendar year. 111 is obviously an angel number. It is the angel number of transitions, it is also the angel number of moving on to new beginnings. It's all ones, okay? A very big deal. This is also the reason why I decided to release GLUM on April 21st. It is 1 month after the Yuga shift. It is the 111th day of the year, which is just an angel number, a powerful number. My life path is a 1. I'm a 1 life path, meaning I'm a leader. I'm someone who, psychic number 1. That's what I am. I'm the best. I'm number 1, okay? So, a lot of things going on. Here's the deal. It's also the day that Klaus from the World Economic Forum stepped down. So, here's the deal. That day is just supercharged. I'm going to tell you right now, dude, of all the days I picked to release my first ever album, I picked the day the Pope dies. That is crazy, dude. If that doesn't tell you, I know what I'm talking about and I know what I'm doing, I don't know what will and what can. The other thing, the reason I decided to call my album GLUM was because it's my first ever album. GLUM is mentioned in the Bible 29 times. 2 plus 9 is 11. 11 is obviously 2 ones. 11 is a master Masonic number, etc., etc. Okay? The concept of the entire album is overcoming the Molochian consciousness. That's what it's all about. The whole thing is about me literally finding truth. That's what the whole thing is about. That's what this whole podcast is about. Okay? And that's the theme. And it's just crazy how it all ties in. It also came out on April 21st, which is one of the days where we are transferring over from Aries into Taurus. My sign is a cusp sign. My birthday is April 19th. I'm an Aries Taurus cusp. The album on the cover has images of Moloch. That's what the cover is. It's a minotaur, which is a depiction of Moloch. Okay, so, who has the head of a bull, right? It's all these themes. It's all of these things. This is symbology. This is what you get when you become someone who understands the archetypes. Moloch is an archetype. These are all archetypal things. This is what I was trying to do and trying to invoke and trying to create a project that was truly esoteric in and of itself, in and of its own nature. Okay, there are tons of other things regarding myself, regarding sacrifice, regarding all of this that I cannot necessarily talk about right now on the show, but we'll get to it eventually, right? And I don't mean that in a condescending way, and I don't mean like I'm sacrificing things. I'm talking in a very sort of poetic, flowery way. And we're talking about, well, let's just get to it then. Fuck it. Why don't we? We're talking about Moloch. We're talking about sacrifices. We're talking about all of these reasons as to why I released GLUM when I did. My real name is Isaac. Okay, Isaac is obviously a biblical character. Now, the reason I was named this was my dad was in church, okay, Catholic Mass, and he was looking through the Bible, and he was flicking through it, and every time he would do it and put his finger down, he would land on the name Isaac. He did this 3 times, and Isaac happened every single time. Now, my father was involved in the music industry. People within the music industry really do things in order to get fame. You can do this part yourself. Look up Eric Clapton and look up what happened to his son. You can probably make some reasonable deductions there as far as what proceeded and what happened from there. But the original story of Isaac and Abraham, okay, and why my dad left the music industry. And I'm still here. I'm here, right? So the original story of Isaac and Abraham is meant to mirror a Molochian sacrifice. Okay, it is supposed to show what the Molochian sacrifice was and what was going on at this time. You had these Canaanites who were sacrificing children up to Baal, or Baal. Okay, now known as Allah, right? And that's what was happening. That's what was popularized, and that's what these people were doing in order to worship these lesser gods, the descendants of the fallen angels, the Nephilim, right? The fallen. So that's what they were doing. Now the story of Isaac, obviously God comes down and he instructs Abraham not to kill Isaac, not to follow through with it, and he saves him. Now, what happens in that story? There's a ram that is caught in the thicket, right? And God instructs Abraham to take this ram out of the thicket and to sacrifice the ram itself instead of sacrificing Isaac. Now, interestingly enough, the death of Christ and the sacrifice of Christ represents and mirrors this story as well. So we have the typical story of a Molochian sacrifice being mirrored within the Torah with this story of Isaac and Abraham and their sacrifice. And then the same story is then mirrored in the New Testament with the sacrifice of Christ. Christ being the lamb, right? He's not the sheep, he's the lamb, okay? Or the ram. At the time, at the time, the ram was then sacrificed. This also represents them being in the age of Aries when this happened. If you read my Meta Aeon of Lucifer article I wrote over on my Substack, this is where we're talking about the Crowley-esque aeons, okay? And this ties into the Ian Ferguson stuff as well. the astrological age is an age that is tied in with the zodiac. Okay, right now we're in the age of Aquarius. Before the age of Aquarius, we were in the age of Pisces. Before the age of Pisces, we were in the age of Taurus. Before the age of Taurus, we were in the age of Aries. Abraham sacrificing the ram in place of his son represented the sacrificing of the ram within the age of Aries. Then when we moved on into the next age, we had the Taurus, we had the bull. This is why Moloch's head is a bull head, because that was the age of Taurus. That's why that was. And when Christ is sacrificed, he wears the crown of thorns. Now, the ram is caught within the thicket. It is the same type of bush that was placed, that was used. The thorns from that thicket were the thorns that were placed on Christ's head. Not the literal exact bush, but that same type of bush. Okay? That's what that represents. Christ is caught within that thicket of sin, right? That's sort of how that parallels. Now, this ties into something very interesting. I'm going to go on a brief tangent about, and then we'll kind of talk about some other stuff. Everything biblically, the Bible is a literal living quantum being. It morphs. It literally changes. Everything is micro to macro, expanding infinitely. This is why within the Bible you have so many parallels and so many things mirroring each other. It does it infinitely. The story of Isaac perfectly parallels and mirrors the sacrifice of Christ. You have Mary, who does so with the Ark of the Covenant, and Christ himself with the Ark of the Covenant. Everything becomes a perfect mirror. It's all metaphorical and literal. So this is something that a lot of people talk about and have sort of qualms with within just sort of biblical study or just study in general, right? There are people who say the Bible is all metaphor. The Bible is all metaphorical. And there are people who say the Bible is all literal. It is literally both. It is metaphor and it is literal. It is everything. It's all of it all at once. I've kind of talked about this a little bit, not really in Izzy's world, but I've talked about this in the past. I had a near-death experience where I literally had a massive heart attack and I died. And I met Christ, literally. In the Garden of Gethsemane, I met Christ face to face as I was literally dying of a heart attack because I was having alcohol withdrawals. And I'm sharing a lot about myself this episode. Okay. So, anyways, I meet him, and I had a literal John the Revelator type of vision. I had a revelation. I saw everything from the beginning to now and all of the future. I saw everything. The way I describe it is everything everywhere all at once. I saw literally all of it. Okay? And that is what was primarily shown to me, was everything is literal, everything is metaphorical, every single thing mirrors, everything means everything all the time. We're literally within a quantum dance. Everything is music, is literally words that I was told. But interestingly enough, when I met Christ in the Garden of Gethsemane, and I'm looking at him and he's crying, and he says to me, because I had suffered years and years of addiction, I'd been suffering in GLUM, sort of funny way to say that. I've been suffering like a decade of addiction, and I couldn't get out of it. And I'm like looking at him, and he's crying, and he said, "I'm sorry I had to put you through that, but it was the only thing I could do to bring you back to me. And it was everything I just needed to hear." And I'm there with him in real life. Like, I'm there. And the craziest thing is, I'm browsing TikTok like a week ago, and in my head, in my body, spirit, being, in my being, I knew I'm in the Garden of Gethsemane. I just knew that. And I'm browsing TikTok, and it shows a video of the Garden of Gethsemane. It was exactly where I was. It was a surreal, extremely surreal experience. And it just continuously ensures me of everything I've been through and everything I will continue to go through. And this is why I am the way that I am with the things I talk about particularly, right? Like, I always get these comments, and there are these people in there going like, why don't you talk about the Bilderbergs? Why don't you talk about the Jesuits? Why don't you talk about the why don't you talk about Keck and Pepe and the mesothelioma? Why don't you talk about mesothelioma and how it affects people with COVID, and in the times of the geopolitical RFK Jr. is a Zionist? Like, these people, like, why don't you talk about the black nobility? Why don't you talk about Skinwalker Ranch? Yeah, like these little Mephistophelic nymphs, these little freaking homoerotic homunculuses, these alchemical bewitched peasants. They say these things. Why don't you talk about? Why don't you talk about the wonderful UFO, you hacking the planet? Why don't you talk about Hollow Earth? Oh, why don't you talk about the Gospel of Barnabas that was written in the 1500s, and it was written in Spanish, a language that wasn't even around back then? Why don't you talk about the Gospel of Thomas and how women can't get into heaven? Look, dude, I have been tremendously blessed with literally having a heart attack, dying, meeting Jesus Christ, coming back to life, not having brain damage, maybe a little bit, and having a revelation that completely blew my mind, where I literally saw things people would, they don't even, I know things. One example of this was I literally predicted my grandfather's death and exactly how he would die. I know things in a mystical level, and I have people asking me, why don't you talk about the Bilderbergs? Dude, I met Jesus. Why would I talk about the Bilderbergs? I don't care about that. You know what I would do if I sat down with Tom Brady? I would ask him how to throw a fucking football. I wouldn't ask him about puppetry. If I sat down with Jimi Hendrix, I would talk to him about the guitar. I don't think I would ask him about astrophysics. Why don't you talk about the Jesuit Bilderbergs? Why don't you talk about a Palestinian fucking nut race? Why don't you talk about the potato sack race that happened in the Orange County Fair in 1983? Why don't you talk about fucking Surf's Up starring the Penguins and Chicken Joe? Why don't you talk about Chicken Joe's outlook on the rings of Saturn? Like, I talk about the things I talk about because I know the things I talk about, and because I've had intimate experiences that very few people have ever had before. You know what I mean? Debunked, actually, because you don't talk about the Bilderbergs. I mean, you're asking the illegitimate grandson of Jim Morrison, who is almost sacrificed to the Molochian underworld as a baby, what he thinks about the Bilderbergs. Oh, this is what they do. They stare at their hand. If you're not watching this, I'm sorry. If you're just listening, they look at their fingers and they go like, they do that Twitch thing and they watch their fingers dance. Why don't you talk about how Florida is actually, why don't you talk about the black Hebrew Israelites? We gotta move on. All right, sorry for the burping. All right, let's go. So Nettspend, let's talk about Nettspend. Let's get a little bit into pop culture for just a moment. Nettspend rules. Nettspend is legit. First of all, he's getting baptized, converting to Christianity in this horrific age. He also knows someone I know, and this person is awesome. Nettspend is legit. Nettspend is approved. Nettspend is someone I would have be a guest on this show. Very few guests I would be willing to have on this show, although we will be having callers to Izzy's World. There will be some people who will be calling into Izzy's World, and I'm going to open those phone lines up, and we're going to do Izzy's World live. We're going to be bringing that Absolutely going to be bringing the heat. But we have a lot of things going on in the background that need to get cleared up before we can completely do that. But what we're going to do now, you guys love the esoterics. I hope that this episode's okay. Let me know in the comments if this is too much esoterics and too much rambling. I'm having a lot of fun with this. I'm still trying to figure out the full voicing of the show. I still have to figure it out. But last week we talked about the Fool. We talked about the Hanged Man. These are two archetypes that exist within the tarot. The tarot is made up of a ton of archetypes. Now, the reason we're focusing so much on archetypes right now is it's all going to make sense. It's all going to make sense next week. Next week or the week after, it's all going to make sense. But what we're going to be doing is we're going to focus on some of the other archetypes that exist within the tarot. But the first thing I want to talk about is the major arcana and the minor arcana and what these are within the tarot. So what I want us to cover all this archetype stuff, and then right at the end, it's all going to proliferate and be like, boom, that's what it is. We get it. We can move on. I can be like Gambit in freaking X-Men, and I can light these tarot cards on fire, and I can fucking throw them, and I can sink them into people's skin. Okay? So the major arcana represents profound life lessons and archetypal experiences, while the minor arcana delves into daily events and details. The major arcana consists of 22 unique cards, each with a specific meaning and symbolism, often representing significant life milestones or spiritual journeys. The minor arcana, on the other hand, is made up of 56 cards divided into 4 suits. This is important. Wands, cups, swords, and pentacles. Further categorized into pip cards and court cards. These cards provide insight in day-to-day situations and personal traits. Now, see how we have major and we have minor. This is very similar to us having things like black and white. We have male, we have female. This is exactly what the Baphomet represents. We have man and we have animal. This is the dichotomy. This is black and white. This is as above, so below. Speaking of as above, so below, I want this on the record because when it comes out eventually, I just need you guys to know. As above, so below refers to the sky turns into the ocean. Think about it, and we'll get back to that another time later. But we talk about the minor arcana and how the minor arcana are represented in 4 different things. We have wands, cups, swords, and pentacles. Now, the interesting thing with this is within Jung's archetypes, we have the 4 things as well. We have the persona. The persona is the mask we wear in social interactions, the public face we present to the world. We have the shadow, the hidden, often repressed side of our personality containing primal instincts, desires, and negative aspects. We have the anima, or the animus, the feminine or masculine archetype that represents the opposite gender's psychological tendencies within the individual. Anima, feminine in men, and animus, masculine in women. And then we have the self, the archetype representing the whole integrated personality, the center of the psyche, where the conscious and unconscious come together. The reason we're focusing on these archetypes so much, as I kind of talked about before, is because these are prevalent within existence as a whole. Before, I talked about how the story of Isaac and Abraham is reflected later in the New Testament. These stories are typical stories. These are things that are constantly being reflected. These characters and motifs are constantly coming about and are constantly a part of culture, pop culture. Well, I guess culture is pop culture, right? And are just associated with everything that we interact with on a day-to-day basis. Once you begin to understand these, you understand art. It makes your art better. It makes everything starts to make sense. An example is just like, it's just like when you write a story, right? Like within a story, you have the hero's journey. You have these same themes and motifs that repeat themselves over and over and over again. The story, the frameworks of the story will always remain the same, but the characters might look slightly different. Now, within the story, the characters will be represented by archetypes themselves. We talked about last week how Josh Block is sort of like a fool type character. We talked about the Hanged Man. We have tons of other archetypical characters that we can get into. We have the Magician, also known as the Magus or the Juggler, is the first trump or major arcana card in most traditional decks. So last week, we covered the Fool. Now the Fool is represented by the number 0, remember? Interestingly enough, this is the first one we covered. I guess we technically covered the Hangman first, but we did do the Fool after that. The Hangman just got like a brief overview. Now the Fool, as the 0, represents it can become anything. Now the one following the Fool is we have the Magician. The Magician is represented by the number 1. And the Magician is represented further by the ability to manifest desires and intentions into reality. It embodies the power of willpower, skill, and the connection between the spiritual and physical worlds, suggesting a time when one has the ability and resources to make things happen. The Magician is also associated with communication, creativity, and the harnessing of energy to achieve one's goals. And interestingly enough, this is exactly what a magician is. This is what we describe when we talk about magic. That's what they do. A magician uses their will and their intentions in order to manifest the reality that they want. That's what all of this stuff is. That's what doing the rituals are. That's what doing this podcast is. This podcast is imparting esoteric knowledge onto people during an age of light, right? When we think about the age of Aquarius, typically, right, the age of Aquarius is represented by a woman pouring out water. This water is literally, it represents knowledge. It's the knowledge that's being imparted onto everybody. Christ was baptized in water, right? It represents a renewal. This knowledge is me pouring out the knowledge I have, imparting it onto you. And what you do with it is exactly the Spider-Man quote, with great power comes great responsibility. What are you going to do with this? You could take this knowledge and become a literal dark wizard and control your own reality and literally bend the will of others and be someone in the dark arts. Or you can have this knowledge and just harness it and know. You can use this knowledge of archetypes to literally create the greatest album or greatest work of art of all time. You can use it to watch movies and to see what's happening. You can go to the Travis Scott concert and see the Hanged Man right in front of you, understanding what it is perfectly, right? What happens when you start thinking mystically, as we talked about before, is what happens is synchronicities happen, like the Fool just happening to be the first thing that I cover that's the number 0. I don't have a supercomputer brain where I'm like, this week I am going to cover the Fool, and then next week I'm going to cover the Magician, and it's going to be number 0, and then it's going to be number 1, and then after that we'll do number 2. I don't think like that. It just happens because I let it happen. I'm Chicken Joe in Surf's Up, riding the big wave. I'm riding the Kali Yuga. I'm surfing the Kali Yuga. I'm literally surfing the Kali Yuga. Are you going to be the Magician? Are you going to take control? The Magician can appear in a reading as a reminder that one has the ability to take change in their life and create the desired outcome. Is that what you're going to do? Are you going to be 31 years old, releasing your first ever album, even though you should have been dead as a baby in a Molochian ritual, even though you were supposed to be killed by the music industry when you were 20 years old, but instead you came back even stronger and released the album at 31 you were never supposed to release, calling out the very people who were supposed to be responsible for the things that were supposed to happen in your life? Is that what you're going to do? Are you going to do that? Are you going to be the Magician? Are you going to be someone who practices true meekness? Now, true meekness is having a sword but not using it. Meekness is not being weak. Meekness is choosing when to be strong. That is being a true magician within the actual word magician. Let's go into Izzy's world. 5.5.